started writing us letters the whole time he was in prison. And he got out, he moved here permanently, started coming to church, and I later baptized him. It was crazy. And then there was a guy that was an atheist, and he would write us nasty letters. And one time we had this all-girl Christian rock band that I found on ChristianRock.net. I reached out to them, and we had them on. They were incredible. He had no clue they were Christian. So he started listening every week, actually with a sick mind, listening every week, hoping we would play that song. And he said that he would leave the volume down until he would hear the guitar at the beginning. He kind of had a memory, he'd turn it up. And then one night we were interviewing them again, like a year later, and the Lord grabbed his heart. He went from being an atheist to a Christian. Unbelievable. And started drawing artwork for their album covers. So that was a crazy cool ministry. So I pastored for a little bit, but really I kind of come from an academic background as far as theologically. So a lot of the stuff that I do, that I study, I kind of study theologically. Doesn't mean that I don't study with my heart, with a heart of faith, but I kind of look for things because I kind of can't help it. So tonight, and I don't know if when it's Bible and Brew, if everybody brings their Bible or the phone, but whatever you have, if you have something, go ahead and open it up, because I want to show you something tonight that I've been actually working on this for about 3 years, and I've never actually showed it to anybody. So you'll be the first, and I'm really excited because when Tate asked me, I kind of restarted working on this, if that makes sense. Yeah. And something came out of this text that blew me away. So we're gonna look at Matthew 8 and 9. I'm not gonna read the whole thing because I know Tate said I had like an hour and that's it. So just kidding. So a lot of you probably know a lot about Matthew 5 to 7, right? Pretty famous Sermon on the Mount. So at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, there's this declaration about the authority of Jesus. And so all this stuff that happens in the Sermon on the Mount, there's basically 10 messages that show up there as far as the overarching theme. And at the end of it, there's this astonishment about this guy's authority. Then Matthew chapter 8 starts, and I'm going to show you something about the structure of Matthew chapter 8 and chapter 9 that is teaching us something. And what's interesting about it is that a lot of times we don't look for that, but especially these writers in the Bible, they were living and writing within the purview of their culture. Matthew was Jewish. He obviously lived surrounded by Jewish people, and the Hebrew people did a lot of crazy things. If you've ever read the Psalms, you've probably noticed where there are times where line 1 and line 2 in a verse says the same thing in a different way, right? Or line 1 and line 2 says 2 different things in the same way. So they were using structures for many reasons, a lot of it to help with memorization. To this day, there are people in Israel studying in Jewish schools that they have to memorize the whole entire Torah and most of the Psalms, and they can do it because that was the culture. So these writers were using tricks of the trade, if you will, to write their Gospels. And not just the Gospels, Paul did it, Peter did it, they were all doing it. And so I sometimes try to look for structures because I'm trying to look for clues into meaning. So in this text, I used to hold a different position, and I'll tell you what it is when we get there than what I'm going to share with you tonight. And it wasn't until recently that this popped out. So if you look at the beginning of Matthew chapter 8, and you'll notice that probably in your translation, whichever one it is, they actually have this statement about the authority of Jesus kind of offset from chapter 7, and they almost put it right in front at the beginning of chapter 8. And really what I'm going to use tonight is more the headings of these sections, which, by the way, are not inspired. They're man-made, right? These headings are. So there are several things that happen, and I want you to see it. So the first thing that happens in Matthew chapter 8 is Jesus cleanses a leper. That's the first thing that happens. And it's more than just this story about this miracle cleansing. Because leprosy, if you study back in the Old Testament, what happens if you were to touch a leper, if you were to be around a leper? You're ritually unclean. And so here is Jesus, the very first miracle he does after the Sermon on the Mount is he cleanses the leper. And it's not an accident that this has happened. The second thing that happens is down in verse 5, where you have the story about the faith of the centurion. what we know about the centurion, he's not Jewish. He's a Gentile. So you have they're either Jew or Gentile. The leper's Jewish, and you know this because Jesus sends him to the temple. Go pay your due to the priest, he says at the end of that first section. Roman centurion, the centurion is a Gentile. And so there's a miracle there where there's this healing of the servant. So then, the very next thing in this first section is Jesus says healing many. And what you have here, he's in Peter's mom's house, heals Peter's mother-in-law, and then all this other stuff happens, and there's this, it says, this exorcising of demons and healing many sick. So this chapter starts out with three miracles, right? So you have cleansing of the leper, Jewish. Roman centurion stuff, Gentile. All the Jewish people around Peter, Jewish. The very next section is, and if you're using the ESV, is entitled "The Cost of Following Jesus," and he lets them know. You know, foxes. He says, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. What this section is, it's about discipleship. And so you have three miracles followed by a statement of discipleship. Here happened. Very next thing, look at Matthew 8:23. This is very famous. Most of you probably know this. When he calms the storm, right? What is that? Miracle, right? Very next thing, Jesus heals 2 men with demons down in verse number 28. What's that? Another miracle. Chapter 9, verse 1 starts out with Jesus healing a paralytic. What's that? Miracle. How many of them are there? How many are there? There's 3. The very next thing is Jesus calling Matthew. Another statement of discipleship. What must we do to follow Christ? We follow him, right? You know, if we're not following Christ, might check yourself. You know, this is discipleship. So this whole section starts out with 3 miracles, discipleship, 3 miracles, discipleship. And then all of a sudden, there's this passage, and we're going to read it in a second, but I want to skip it for just a second. Chapter 9, verse 14 down to 17. Now I'll just tell you here, I'll give away a little something. This section doesn't fit. It just absolutely does not fit into this whole what's happening here. For years and years and years, I was perplexed about this section. So let's jump past chapter 9, verse 14 and following. So then, guess what? Chapter 9, verse 18, Jesus heals girl's restored to life, and then the woman who's hemorrhaging. Know anything about a hemorrhaging woman in Judaism? Guess what? She's ritually unclean. By Jesus doing what he did, he's now ritually unclean. So how about that? Section 1 starts out with Jesus healing a leper, and section 3 starts out with him healing a ritually unclean female. What's going on here? So then the very next thing in chapter 9, or in this section, Jesus heals 2 blind men. Then he heals a man unable to speak. And then guess what? A passage on discipleship. So Matthew's using a trick here to help us to understand what's going on. So you have 3 miracles, discipleship, 3 miracles, discipleship, 3 miracles, discipleship. It's setting this up for us to see something. So I want to tell you what I used to think was going on. I used to think that Matthew, and there's probably still some truth to this, that Matthew's trying to tell a little bit of a story. So think about what Jesus does. Everything that Jesus does, who really has the authority to do that? I mean, who has power over nature? Somebody say God. That's it. You know, I don't know about you, but I've never been able to tell the rain to stop and it stops. So he's showing that he has power over nature. His ability to exorcise demons, showing that he has power over the supernatural. His ability to heal leprosy, his ability to heal the sick, his ability to restore sight, restore sound. Just about everything you can think of from a miracle standpoint shows up in this section. So what's Jesus / Matthew doing here? What he's doing is he's making a statement about Jesus. What he's saying is, and remember this, Matthew's writing to a Jewish audience. So what he's saying is, hey, guess what? Those of you that have been waiting for the Messiah, this is him. This is him. Matthew's writing the person of this culture knowing that his Jewish brothers and sisters don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Has anybody ever been to Israel? By chance? Awesome. And the Jewish people that are there now believe it? They don't. It's crazy. You know, they will talk to you and talk to you. I had a guy one time, I was in the old city, And the guy is actually a Jewish man from New York City who moved over there. And we had this discussion. He said, well, how come he never said he was the Messiah? And I took him to the message at the Rock in the gates of hell, and I said he does. And he said, no. I mean, even when you can show them, they don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. It's amazing. Well, this is what Matthew's doing. He's using all of these different healings to prove that Jesus must be God, because only God has the authority to do this. It's no accident that this whole thing starts off at the end of chapter 7 with a statement about his authority. 3 miracles of discipleship, 3 miracles of discipleship, 3 miracles of discipleship. But what I could never figure out is chapter 9, verse 14 to 17. Because it doesn't fit, right? It doesn't fit the pattern. And I'm convinced that Matthew's using a pattern. I've just seen too much. Now, I want to say real quickly, for those of you that might decide to start looking for patterns, if you look under every rock for a pattern, and you think you find something that helps you make your point, and it's not really the point of the text, that's not good interpretation. You want to make sure that it comes out of the text, that you're not taking it into the text. So I want to read what this passage says, because it's really crazy. So the disciples of John came to Jesus, saying, why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? And Jesus said to them, can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? Anybody notice anything? What was the question asked of Jesus? It was a question about what? Fasting. What was his response? He didn't say anything about fasting, did he? He returns with the word mourn. By the way, I got somebody else that knows it's two different words in Greek. This is not a modern day translation issue. It's two different words. And it wasn't until that hit me that I was like, oh, wait a minute. Jesus has to be saying something. I believe every one of these words are inspired by God. And so if that's happening, then there's something going on. So why would Jesus say that? So I started doing a little bit of digging. Here's what's going on. So the disciples of John, how Jewish were they? Guess what? They're pretty Jewish. They are pretty Jewish. Matter of fact, some people believe that, if you believe that John the Baptist has anything to do with the out in Qumran community of the Essenes, I mean, a lot of people do, and I don't think they're incorrect. You're talking about a pretty strict group of Jewish people. And so Jesus is answering them in a way that they should understand what he's saying, because fasting and mourning goes hand in hand with Yom Kippur. It goes hand in hand with Yom Kippur. If you study the Day of Atonement in Leviticus chapter 16 and also chapter 23, one of the things that they're supposed to do is afflict themselves. That means they're supposed to fast and they're supposed to mourn for their sin. And so here are these Jewish disciples coming to Jesus and saying, hey, how come your disciples aren't fasting? And he doesn't say anything about that to them. He says the word mourn. Then he goes on and he says, and this is where I was like, what is happening here? The day will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. So you have the disciples saying something, John's disciples saying something about fast, Jesus using mourn, returning back to fast. And he says, no one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made. Neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skins burst, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed, but new wine is put into the fresh wineskins, so both are preserved. So remember where this passage falls. 3 miracles discipleship, 3 miracles discipleship, this 3 miracles discipleship. Matthew is using structure to tell us something. And here's what he's saying. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has said a lot, right? After the Sermon on the Mount, he's acted a lot. And we know that this is authority. What he's trying to reveal to them is that he did not come to preserve the ritualistic way of Judaism. That's not why Jesus came. Jesus didn't come to preserve Judaism. He's going to turn ritualistic Judaism on its head. That's what he's doing. Because what do you have to do if you're Jewish? It's a works-based religion. It's works-based. And that's not what Jesus is going to do. And so he's talking about this new cloth, old garment. New wineskins, old garment. Well, guess what? Because something new is coming, namely him, and in him, substitutionary atonement. That's what's going on. Is that before, when you have to do all of these different things as a Jewish person to get to God, that time is it's coming to an end. It's talked about in the New Covenant, Jeremiah 33. It's talked about in Ezekiel that there's going to be a difference in this man, and here it is. Because the truth of Christianity is that Jesus came to die in your place. There's a Greek word that's used for that all the time. It's called huper, and it means on your behalf. That's what it means. Paul uses it over and over in this particular Greek word over and over again in his epistles, because he wants us to understand that Jesus did for you what you couldn't do for yourself, which is die for your sins. You can't do it. And so that just blew my mind that this, I believe, is Matthew's point. Now, that doesn't take away all the things that we can learn from the rest of it. It doesn't mean that we can't learn about who Jesus is, but I'll tell you what it does take away. It does take away this notion that when you read this section, that we should come away from it believing that Jesus will calm all the storms in your life, and that Jesus will take all the evil away from your presence, and that it'll heal all your diseases. Because that's not the point of the text. Does that mean that he doesn't do those things? No, I'm not saying that. That's not the point of this text. The point of this text is that Jesus is different. Jesus is doing something that nobody has ever done before or since, and that is die in your place. He wasn't patching up this righteousness, this outward righteousness that was found in Judaism. He wasn't patching that up. That's what he means. The wineskins, the old garment, the new garment, that's what he means. So what does it mean to us? I mean, it's one thing to tear apart a passage and study its structure and try to find out what Matthew's saying. To me, that's what we have to be telling people. Are we, when we're talking about Jesus, are we telling them that he's going to make your life better? I don't know about you, but I know people that have come to faith in Christ whose lives didn't get better than the here and now. I mean, some people it turns everything around, but for some people it doesn't. What do we do with those people? That's because that's not altogether true. How ritualistic are we in our own lives? How works-based is your faith? Making sure that if you do this and you do this and you do this and you do this, that God will approve you. That goes against everything that Jesus is teaching here. This structure, and it's really, you can't see this. I brought a few more. I didn't know how many people would be here, so I just kind of grabbed a handful. So I actually wrote some stuff out here that's got this structure laid out, because you can really see it when it's printed. There's some information about Day of Atonement. There's some other stuff. So before you leave there, and if you run out and somebody wants one, Tate will probably tell you how to get in touch with me, or I'll post it on Facebook or something. But I just encourage you to study the Word and try to find out what it's telling us. We don't have the authority to tell this thing what it says. We just don't. I mean, it's the very breath of God, according to 2 Timothy 3:16. And so when you study it, I encourage you to find these passages, spend time with them. I think sometimes we just feel like we just got to read through it as fast as we can. We got to check the box off on our daily Bible reading plan. Spend time with the Lord, and ask the Spirit to open your eyes to some things, because this is amazing to me. That when I think about every single day, that what a wretched, terrible heart that I have, and I sin all over and over. Every single day it seems like I commit the same sins. But I know that Jesus died on my behalf, that he took those sins upon himself. And that's the good news of Jesus. Anything else that we're sharing with people is not good news. It's not good news to tell people that Jesus is going to make everything better. Now, there's truth to that in the afterlife. There's some truth to that in eternity. But right here, I've seen people walk away from the church because they were convinced to believe that everything was going to be all right. And then all of a sudden, they profess faith in Christ, and the next thing you know, Satan comes after them. He comes hard. And there's a couple people, I think, Amy Joe, I baptized you, didn't I? Did I tell you in the hallway before? I said, now it gets hard. Remember that? I told every person I've ever baptized in my life, because I did it. So, at least I told you. So, and that's the other thing. There's so much more about this passage. I really could spend hours here, but I'll give you just two more thoughts here. So, at the end, in chapter 8, verse 17, you already have this illusion, and I don't know how I missed it all these years to study this passage, but I missed it forever. It talks about that he took our illnesses and bore our diseases. Substitutionary atonement. He shows up earlier in the passage. Jesus taking our place. And you also have this cost of following Jesus. You know, foxes have holes, Son of Man doesn't lay his head. He tells another disciple, one disciple says, "Look, let me go bury my father." He says, "Follow me, leave the dead to bury their own dead." What's he saying to them? He's talking about commitment without comfort. He's talking about commitment without compromise. You know, sometimes people come to faith, and discipleship is a growing process, and sometimes it's really painful. It's really, really painful. Some of you probably experienced it. I had a very, very, very close friend who gave her life to become a missionary and was on the field for a very short time and died. How do you make sense of that? Some of you may know what I'm talking about. Beltway was Sending Church. It's just, how do you make sense of that? How does somebody who's serving God in a foreign country and telling people about Jesus die from a mosquito bite? How do you figure that out? It's hard. It's really hard. Knowing that discipleship is not often at times as pretty as we think it sounds. But you know what is? What is always the most beautiful story you could ever tell is that Jesus died in your place. That is a beautiful story. Every single time it's a beautiful story. So thanks for having me. Again, if you want to look at this a little bit further, there's a few handouts. I wish I'd have brought more. And thanks for